Hello everybody and welcome to this video on using infrastructure as code to effectively manage your Tableau server in AWS. My name is Peter, I'm consultant at the Information Lab and I'll be taking you through this content today. The video will cover some quite beginner content, so if you're quite new to AWS or thinking about moving your Tableau server to the cloud, then this should hopefully be a useful session for you. Or if you've been managing Tableau in AWS for a while, but have been configuring your environment manually, then hopefully we can show you a better way of doing things. Before we jump into the text editor and start writing out configuration and infrastructure as code files, I wanted to start with looking at the AWS console and how we might create a Tableau server if we were doing this process manually. Once we've done that, hopefully we can demonstrate how we can make our lives much easier by then moving to the infrastructure as code way of doing things. So here I am in the console for AWS. I am in the Ireland region, but this would work in any other region just the same way. And I have here the instances page of the EC2 part of the console open here. So if you just search for EC2 in the bar at the top there, you should be able to find the instances area from that. You can see I have no running instances at the moment. There's nothing on my screen here in the middle. So if we were to start building out a new instance, we would go up here to this orange button in the top right-hand corner, and we would go and launch an instance. That takes us into the instance creation wizard, where we go through a number of steps to set up exactly how we want this instance to be. The first of those being our AMI page. So which machine image do we want this instance to use? I'm going to kind of create a Tableau server instance here that we could potentially install Tableau server on. So if I was doing that, I might use an Ubuntu operating system. And if I was installing Tableau server, I would need the 1804 operating system there for Ubuntu server. I can configure that, and then I get taken to the next page where I can choose my instance type. Now here, if I was picking an instance type to build a Tableau server, I would pick something nice and big. But in the interest of this demo, I just really need something small just to demonstrate the point. So I'm going to go ahead and pick a T3 Nano. Don't really worry if this doesn't really mean anything to you at this point. These are just the different instance types that we have within the AWS EC2 service. And yeah, you can see that they have different power and memory and options within those different instance types. And yeah, just for today, for this demo, we will just look at a T3 Nano. So with that, we can go on to the next page, which is our instance details. And here we can get specific about exactly where we want this instance to live within VPCs and subnets and the like, and also other things that we might want to configure, such as IAM roles or behavior on shutdown, etc. For us, I'm just going to make sure that our network is set to the defaults. I'm going to set the subnet to EU West 1A and leave everything else as it is in the default settings there. I can then go on to add our storage. Maybe I want to increase this a little bit. I could go 100 gigabytes there and maybe a newer volume type of GP3 rather than GP2. And that would just create as one volume that our instance can use to store its data on. I can continue through the wizard here into the tags section. Let's give our instance a name. I can give it a name tag there, and let's call it Tableau Server Manual. Once I'm happy with that, again, click on Next to go to the next step, which is then our configuring of the security groups. So this is going to determine who can get into our server on which particular ports. I'm going to not create a new one. I will select an existing one, and I will use, again, just this default one that is created in the default VPC. Doesn't have any rules set up actually really here, but for the purposes of this demo, it will be perfectly fine. Then finally, again, click Next. And the last page we have here is our review and launch page. So I can check over the settings that I've just applied, and I can hit launch to create this new instance. So let's go ahead and do that. I'll pick myself a key pair, acknowledge that I have access to that key pair, and then it will go ahead and initiate the instance. The instance will now launch, and in a few moments, I will be able to go and actually access that instance. So a relatively quick process, and depending on your experiences with IT infrastructure in the past, you might find that extremely quick and extremely easy. But there were a number of manual steps we had to go through there to create that instance and determine exactly the properties for the instance that we wanted to. Not to mention, I have my instance now, but I haven't actually got Tableau Server installed on it, obviously. I would then need to go and SSH into the instance. It is running Ubuntu. SSH in, and then go through the configuration process of installing the Tableau server. Again, more manual processes, more steps for me to have to go through to actually get my server up and running. So relatively quick to get things running, but there is a number of steps and things could be quicker. And this is where our infrastructure as code comes in. So before we dive into the nitty-gritty in too much detail, let me just show you how quick and easy it actually is to deploy a new instance using that infrastructure as code method. So I'm going to use a different service here. I'm not in the EC2 service window anymore. I am now in my CloudFormation service, again in the Ireland region. But again, that could be across any region that you choose. I'm just using Ireland for today's example. And you can see at the moment, I have no stacks within this CloudFormation service. We'll get onto what stacks means shortly, but I can go ahead and create myself a stack with new resources with this option in the top right. I can upload a template, and again, we'll get into what templates are in a short time. Pick a template from my local machine. I'm going to use Tableau Server 01. Click Next, give my stack a nice name, so I will again call it Tableau Server, let's call this Tableau Server 1. Click Next, I have a few options that I could configure, but I will just leave those as defaults. Next again to review the options and the specifications that I've made in this deployment. And at the bottom, I can create that stack. Now what this is doing here, I haven't shown you the behind the scenes of exactly how this template is configured, but what this is doing is creating the exact same instance as what we've just done manually, but with this CloudFormation technique, as opposed to us having to go and configure everything ourselves. So the CloudFormation service here gives me a running summary of what's going on in terms of events. So it's currently trying to create that EC2 instance there. I can actually jump back into my instances page here, and I should see it pop up momentarily. Which I do there, I see I have my original Tableau Server manual instance, and then this new one that it's just created, Tableau Server 1, which is the one that's created via CloudFormation. Again, this one doesn't have Tableau Server installed, but I could include Tableau Server installation within my CloudFormation template. And we'll get onto all of that shortly as we dive in more about how you configure templates and how you can set this up for your instances. So again, in a few moments, this will be ready for me to connect to. It will finish initializing, and I will see in here that I have a create complete status on the stack in CloudFormation. So again, a very quick, very easy process to go and create ourselves an instance. And hopefully you can see that that is quicker than the manual way, and also requires so much less in terms of me having to pick the right settings, me determining what storage I want or what security group it should go and sit in. because all of that is done with the configuration file, which I will show you. So before we jump into that, before we actually get into that detailed look at those templates, let's just run over a few reasons why infrastructure as code might be interesting to you and why you might want to start moving your deployments towards this technique. So the first one is that speed aspect. So we can, as just demonstrated very quickly, very smoothly and easily, click create stack, point it at the stack or template rather that we want to create, and we can go and build the whole infrastructure configuration that we want to have without having to go and manually process or manually go through and set up all of those individual elements. With a single instance, that difference might not be huge, but if you're creating multiple instances for maybe a clustered Tableau server environment, all the other things around it, like creating the VPC itself, creating the subnets and the security groups themselves, you can see that quickly it will become much more difficult to do a manual process versus writing out your configuration and then creating that stack with CloudFormation. And then there's also that concept of moving away from anything that can be automated and we can leave the computer to do for us, and moving to other tasks that might bring more value to our organizations. So when we have something that can be sped up by us just clicking go and letting the computer do it for us, then we should be exploring those avenues as much as possible. With the caveat there that there is some upfront cost in terms of time with actual writing out of the templates themselves. Next, and maybe the biggest reason here for moving over to this infrastructure as code, is the consistency of being able to guarantee every time you want to deploy a Tableau server or a Tableau server environment, guarantee that that will be the same each time. So we're taking out the potential for me making a mistake as I go through that wizard and select all the different little configuration options, or missing an option entirely, or putting it in the wrong security group and suddenly opening up your Tableau server to the whole internet and making it vulnerable. So we have that consistency, and that infrastructure will be deployed the same each time we want to create that. Then finally, we have the ability to use this infrastructure as code, these configuration files that we create, as a form of documentation of the things we are creating. The infrastructure setup that we have is represented by the documents that we write in our infrastructure as code, and that can act as that single source of the truth. So maybe new team members coming in can go and see, okay, we deploy 2 instances in this VPC, we create a security group to associate with those instances, and so on. And then combined with that, we can use Git or a version control system of some sort to have a traceable history of any changes that were made to that configuration. So if something goes wrong, we can roll back, or we can see who's made changes and what changes have been made to that configuration over time. So those are some general points about why it's useful for having our infrastructure as code written, but we're looking today at specifically Tableau Server and why might we use infrastructure as code in conjunction with Tableau Server. With Tableau Server, you hopefully won't need to be rebuilding and reconfiguring your instances on a regular basis, but there's definitely areas where infrastructure as code can be particularly useful with Tableau deployments. And the first of those, again, looking at that consistency point, is looking at environmental consistency. So you can activate your Tableau server key on up to 3 machines. So we highly recommend running at least one other machine in conjunction with a production machine, a dev server if you will, to have a place to go and test things like performance or configurations or settings on the server itself, and also look at the impact of, okay, we need to upgrade to a new version. How is that going to affect the server or affect the users on our server? If we did this in the manual way, we could create our server, we'd go through and manually create that development server. When it comes to deploying the production server, we could try and get it exactly the same, but we wouldn't be confident, or we potentially would find differences between those two environments. Whereas with infrastructure as code, once we've done the testing on that deployment on the dev server, we can then just deploy the exact same template into production and be confident that we will have exactly the same environments. And the things that we were testing on dev match up with what we see in production. Linked to that is the ability to, once we actually start upgrading our production servers and recreating production servers, when we want to do a Tableau server upgrade, we can make that as smooth and as efficient as possible. So this is maybe the biggest thing here, is the ability to make upgrades really, really easy. So there is no need, when we have this infrastructure as code and when we're deploying our Tableau servers into the cloud, there is no need to upgrade in place. We don't need to take our servers offline for the afternoon or for the day so that we can go through and run that upgrade script on this instance that we have. Because what we can do is we can leave our current existing server as it is, create a new one using the same template that we used previously, but just installing the newer version. We can restore a backup from our existing server onto that new location. And then we can say, okay, we don't want our users to go to the old server version anymore. We want to point them over to our new server, our new upgraded onto the new version. So we can run those two versions of our server, those two instances, side by side until we're sure that everybody's happy with the new server version, and then we can go and we can switch off that old one. So if we do at any point need to go and switch back because there's a problem with the new version, we can do that without any problems. Quick diagram of what that looks like. So we have in the middle here our load balancer. We have our users being directed to that load balancer. And then the load balancer just passes those users onto our current existing Tableau server on 21.4. When we want to create our new server, we don't do anything to the existing one. We create that new server as a secondary instance within our AWS environments. We can then switch the traffic over so that instead of our load balancer pointing to the old server, it's now pointing at the new one. So our users are now getting trafficked over into that Tableau server 2022.1 version. And then when we're happy that those users are being able to successfully connect, they can see all their workbooks, everything's working as expected, we can go ahead and get rid of the old server. So we don't need to stop users at any point having access to Tableau server. We might want to say there's a time period when you shouldn't publish because we are going to be restoring a backup. But this process is made so much easier by just having both of those servers up and running for a short period. And then when we're happy with the new one, we get rid of the old one. Another reason why infrastructure as code might be particularly useful for Tableau server is in the event of an outage or a problem with your Tableau server. So issues can obviously arise at any point in time. It could be at the application level, the instance level, or kind of the whole AWS level. But we can recover from those issues and those outages much easier if we have that infrastructure as code template ready to redeploy whenever we need it. So having the peace of mind that if you do see a problem, you can just deploy a new server at the click of a button or the click of a few buttons, rather than having to go and configure everything and have it up and running. You can have that server up and running in a few hours rather than having to fix your problems on the existing server that might take a number of days if you run into any particularly problematic issues. There's also the option, if you are a little bit more risk averse, to then go ahead and create standby instances. So we can create an exact copy of our production server, deployed maybe into a different availability zone. And if we had a problem with our existing server, we could immediately switch traffic if we were using a hot standby, it's just ready to go and reserve our users with that exact same content. Or if we're using a cold standby, we would then maybe have to restore a backup and turn the server on, or turn the server on and then restore a backup. And then we could switch traffic. But again, because we have that infrastructure as code, we can be sure that our standby instances are exactly the same as our production instance that is in use. And then finally, it's rare for there to be a problem at the AWS availability zone or region level. But if that does happen, then we can go and just redeploy again into a different location. So if an AZ goes down, we can deploy into another AZ in our region. Or if the whole region goes down, we could go and deploy our servers into another region entirely. And again, because you have that configuration template, it's just going to be the same server in a different location. So then, how do we actually go ahead and do this whole infrastructure as code deployment that we've just been talking about? There's a number of options. We're going to focus today on CloudFormation, but there is other infrastructure as code tool out there, not just CloudFormation available. Common ones are Terraform. AWS has another more kind of developer focused CDK, which you can write your infrastructure as code as Python or JavaScript, etc., and then deploy that through those different programming languages. And also another one that does a similar thing to the CDK is Pulumi, another kind of cloud agnostic tool which can go into other different cloud providers such as GCP or Azure, as Terraform can. And again, similar to the AWS CDK in terms of how you write those configuration files. If we were looking at Azure or Google Cloud, then they would have their own similar services to CloudFormation as well. Like I say, CloudFormation is going to be our focus for the rest of this video. AWS's definition of the CloudFormation service is giving you the ability to model, provision, and manage your AWS resources by treating infrastructure as code. So yeah, as we've said, the ability to write those configurations, model that configuration setup, and then provision those resources within AWS. The resources that you do provision by using CloudFormation, you obviously pay for those resources because you're creating them within AWS, but there is no additional charge for using CloudFormation to do the deployments. So if an EC2 instance costs $1 an hour to run when you're creating it manually, then it will cost $1 an hour to run if you're creating that same instance with CloudFormation. And there's a small caveat in that CloudFormation can be used to deploy third-party resources, and they come with kind of additional handler operation costs. That's why we've got a little asterisk there. But yes, when we're using AWS resources, there's no additional charge there. But I would kind of recommend just checking out the CloudFormation pricing page for the full explanation of what costs you might incur. Also wanted to include there the documentation, because the documentation for CloudFormation is actually pretty good. So it's there on the docs.aws.amazon.com websites. And there you can go through, it's got a welcome guide, it's got kind of all the reference material as well that you will need when you start writing your templates. And as we mentioned templates, let's move on to what do we mean when we said earlier deploying templates and creating stacks. So when we say templates, what we mean is the files that we write to model the logical resources and their configuration properties that we want to deploy. So we're specifying, okay, I want to deploy an EC2 instance. Templates can be in JSON formats or YAML formats. I personally prefer YAML, so for the rest of the video we will be looking at YAML. And once we have that template written out, we can use it to create a stack. So the stack is then in charge of creating, updating, deleting the physical resources that are actually created in your AWS environment. So the template, you write out the logical resources, the stack is in charge of the physical resources that it's creating within AWS. So your logical resource might look a little bit something like this, an EC2 instance. You write that to a template. You then use that template to create a stack, and that stack is in control of those physical resources. Just a note here, you can use one template to create as many stacks as you want, but once you have a stack created that is in, let's say your logical resource list was one EC2 instance, that one stack will only ever control one EC2 instance, because that's what was specified in the template. Okay, and then let's go now and actually look at building some simple templates. A quick introduction to building these templates and deploying our Tableau servers onto AWS. So I'll jump now over to my text editor. This is the point where we will actually start looking at some configuration files. And really a template at its simplest level is just a list of the resources that you want to create. So here's the resources part of the templates. I can expand this out here and I can see that I have one resource specified here in this file. That is my Tableau server EC2 instance. This is the name of the resource I'm creating. Within there, I need to specify the type of resource I want to create. So this one here is the AWS : EC2 : instance. And then I also specify the properties that I want to use to configure this resource as well. So the properties we can see here, just some kind of simple ones that we've got set up. And this is the template that I used to create that server at the start there. So we've got an instance type of T3 Nano. We've got an image ID, which gives our AMI image ID there. I've given it a key name, so I can access this server via SSH with my key pair. Subnet ID. I've given it a security group ID to associate with. I've given it a block device mapping, which just tells AWS what kind of storage you want to associate with this EC2 instance. So like we did with the manual setup, it's GP3 and a volume size of 100 gigabytes. Then finally, I've done a tag of giving it a name. So we're just calling it Tableau server instance. And then the crucial bit here, the bit that we would really need to expand on to actually go and install this Tableau server and get it ready for use without any other further input from us, is to update this user data section. So this is the crucial bit where we can enter a number of commands that will run on the server once that server has been deployed. And those commands can include installing your drivers, setting up your Tableau server install file, and then actually running an installer to go and install that file and install Tableau server onto the instance. So that can all be specified within this user data section here. At the moment, my user data is just echoing script to install Tableau server here. So it doesn't really do anything other than write this message into the command line. But yeah, that could then, if we had written this out, we could have that installing the whole and configuring all of the Tableau server specific settings as well. And then, like I said, that is the configuration file. This is the template that I used to build that stack Tableau Server 1 earlier on in the session. So we've just shown a few examples of some simple properties you might associate with an EC2 instance here. So instance type and ID, or image ID, and so on. But like I said, the documentation is quite good in terms of providing the full list of all the properties available to a particular resource, such as an EC2 instance. And also, as you can see down the side here, we do have examples as well. So if you weren't quite sure how to configure a particular thing, such as the block device mapping, which is a little bit different to some of the others, you have these examples here as well to just show you how you might want to go about that. Okay, but here what we've done is we have manually, or we've not manually, we've hard coded all of our different property values here into our template. What if we wanted to, using that example of disaster recovery, what if we wanted to very quickly deploy this again, but in a different subnet, because we wanted to deploy it in a different availability zone? If we were using this exact template, we would have to come in here and we would have to go and manually, or we'd have to go and update that hard-coded value here for subnet ID. So this is where we can get a little bit more complicated with our templates and add in other areas that allow us to make this a little bit more flexible to the different deployments we might want to create. So with that, I'm going to jump over to my second example here, and you can see that now instead of just having the resources section of my template, I now also have a parameters section. So my resources are really just the same. It's the same EC2 instance. It's the same properties, but now for my subnet ID, my instance type, instead of those being hard-coded values, what I'm doing is I'm referencing a parameter. So I'm referencing a parameter called instance type, and those parameters are specified up here in the parameters section. So I have three here. I have instance type, subnet ID, and security group. If I just open up security group, you'll see that I'm referencing a value there as well. So with these parameters, what we can do on stack creation, we can enter values that will be used in these different property values. My parameter configuration or my parameter setup here is just having so you have to specify the type of parameter that you want to use. So those two subnet and security groups are both strings. We can also specify a description to give our users a little bit of information about what they should be using or what they should be entering into this particular parameter. We can give default values as well. So I'm giving a default instance type here of T3 nano. And we can also even provide a list of allowed values. So that becomes then a drop-down list and the user can pick from the list of allowed values. So if I was actually creating a Tableau server, I might use an M5 4x large instance type instead. So let's go and create this, or create a new stack with this template, and we'll see what that looks like when we actually use the parameters in our creation. I'm going to jump back into my CloudFormation service in AWS console here. I'm going to go create a stack with new resources once again, as I did previously. I'm again going to upload a template file just from my local machine. And I'm going to upload the Tableau Server 02 template this time. Note in here, we went through it quite quickly earlier, but you can use some of the sample templates that AWS has on offer. You can create templates. There's like a designer window that you can use to go through and create this template step by step as well within that window. Or if you are specifying the template yourself, you don't have to specify it from a local file. You can also grab them from S3 as well. So if you had a central repository of all your templates within S3, you could use the S3 URL option there to go and find them. I'm specifying my local file though. I'm again going to give it a name. Let's call it Tableau Server 2 this time. And we can see here the parameters that we were just talking about from our template. So the instance type with its description. We have that little drop down where we can pick one of two different instance types. Our security group is a string field, as we defined in our templates. So here we can type in the string that we want to use. So I want to use that security group just there. And the same with our subnet. We want to just type in the subnet that we want to use. So that will be the subnet that I'm using. So yeah, these again are going to be the exact same as the ones we've already deployed, but if we did need to deploy this into a different location or with different security group configurations as well, we could do that very quickly and easily without having to change our original templates. Again, I'm going to skip through these options and leave everything as default there. I'm going to skip through the review process because I'm happy that this is going to create successfully, and then I will create my stack. And it's going to go through the exact same process as we saw when it was creating Tableau Server 1 earlier on. So that's just using those parameters to add that flexibility in. So if things do change in our templates, or we want to change things and deploy slightly differently, then we have that ability without needing to change the underlying template itself. One final thing on parameters before we move on is just to note that AWS rather does have some kind of pseudo parameters that are available no matter what you specify up here in this parameters section. So if I go and open up my user data here at the bottom, the key and value section for my tags, you can see here that I'm actually naming my instance here based on the stack name that I provided for the kind of overriding stack that creates this EC2 instance. So this is no longer a hard-coded name, it is using that stack name, which is a pseudo parameter provided by AWS that I can use within my templates. There's other pseudo parameters such as the account ID. So if you needed to use the account ID somewhere within your configuration, or if you need to use the region, and we'll see that in a moment, we can use AWS : region to have a parameter for the region that this stack is being deployed into. Another thing to note here is this sub function. So we looked at the reference function with our instance type, security group, and subnets. Here we are using the sub function, which instead of just very simply referencing the parameter and dropping it into the value as we have with instance type, the sub allows us to sub the parameter into a larger string. So this is the same the exact same for both pseudo parameters and our defined parameters that we have, for example, instance type. Either would work in exactly the same way, but here we're adding this extra little bit of string on the end, dash instance. So we are this time using the sub function. And the sub function just has this extra little bit of syntax where we need to include the dollar symbol and those curly braces as well. Okay then, and then even more flexibility, adding more into our template here to add more options for flexibility is the ability to include mapping as another different section within our template hierarchy. So this again is a very similar deployment to the ones we've just been looking at. It's got the same Tableau server with very much the same properties across here, but this time we're including a map for the instance or the image ID that we're using for this instance. So the map here enables us, because AMI IDs are different across regions, we couldn't use, I'm currently deploying in Ireland, I couldn't use the Ireland AMI ID to deploy a instance in London, for example. So the mapping enables us to have a map here for the image ID, where I can say, okay, if we were deploying in EU West 1, which we are, use this particular AMI ID. If we were deploying in EU West 2, i.e. London, we would instead be using this AMI ID. If I just open that up, again, we have similar parameters to what we had before, subnet ID and security group ID. But now this additional mapping is being used for the image ID. So I have the mapping section that define how these all line up. So which ID I should use for each different region. And then the syntax for using that map within my properties is via this findInMap function, where we first specify the map name. So AWS AMI region map relates to this map name here. The second value there is the top level key. So here our top level key in our map is each individual region. So EU Central 1 or EU West 1. So we're using that pseudo parameter of AWS region to find the top level key that we are actually deploying this stack into. So in my case here, when I deploy this, it will use the EU West 1 region, because that will be the region that I'm deploying into. And then finally, the last bit is the second level key. So that is AMI ID. They're all AMI ID here, but you just need to have that in. AWS allows you to have multiple things in here. So you could have something else in here. So you could have an instance name, maybe. So you call it something different in each different region. We don't want to do that though. We're happy with just AMI ID as the second level key. And that just gives or returns, then findInMap would resolve as the AMI ID there ending in E8. Again, just adding more flexibility. So now I do have that ability to deploy this into a number of different regions, again, without having to change the underlying template that I'm using. So this time, if I go back into my CloudFormation service interface in the console there, again, I'm going to create a new stack. Again, I'm going to create a stack from a template file that I'm uploading from my local machine. I'm again going to give it a stack name of Tableau server, this time 3. Give it a security group and a subnet as parameters. And you'll notice here there's nothing to do with the map. The map is slightly different from the parameter in that it all works behind the scenes. It's doing that finding within the map without us having to specify anything else. So it doesn't show up as an option, it doesn't show up as any of these configure stack options. It all just works and flexibly updates our template without us actually seeing that from this create stack view. So again, just click next there, click create stack here, and once again I'll go through, or it will go through for me and create the new instance as we saw there with Tableau Server 2 and then now Tableau Server 3. I can refresh my instances console page, and I now again have another server instance being created with the same configuration, but now with that additional bit of mapping functionality. Okay, once again, I just want to mention the documentation here. It is very good for explaining all of these different bits of the templates that you have. So this template anatomy section will walk you through the different aspects of a template. You're not limited to just parameters, mappings, and resources as we've looked at today. There are other things as well that you might want to use as you get more advanced. But I think those three are the three key ones to get started with. And then each of them has its own documentation as well. So you can see exactly what things you could put in a parameter. You're not limited to the ones, again, that I've shown you today. You can have allowed patterns, you can have constraints, and so on and so on. So yeah, I think this would be our first port of call. If you do get excited and interested in using infrastructure as code and using CloudFormation, I highly recommend just going through this documentation here and just checking out the different things that it can do, and particularly these different bits of reference material here. And the last thing I want to touch on today is another good place to get started, and that is the AWS Quick Starts for Tableau Server. So we talked today about how to start from very kind of ground zero in terms of the very bottom of starting to build a template, but a lot of this work has already been done, and AWS makes it very easy to get started with these quick start options where the templates are fully built out for you. You can actually even deploy them straight into your account from the AWS Quick Starts website there. They're also open and available for you to go through and look at the templates themselves. So I would recommend, if you are interested, just going and exploring the contents of the table, the templates as well. So the GitHub repository is there on the screen, or if you just search AWS Quick Starts in Google, you will be able to find those two pages as well. And yeah, the templates, they're quite complex, but they will go through and deploy a whole Tableau server on different operating systems, whether you need to create a VPC or you already have one, if you want to create multiple node servers versus just single node servers. So it's really all there, ready to use, ready to go with these quick start guides. So yeah, let's just quickly show you that. We have here the different things that you could potentially build. So you can, like I say, build single node or multi-node deployments. And if we scroll down into the how to deploy section, we can just click on this and use an existing VPC and create a brand new Tableau server without having to do any touching of any templates. So this will import this into my create stack view that we've just been looking at, and it will build that stack directly into my AWS region. I mentioned also they do have the templates open and available to check out as well. So this is the GitHub repository. In the templates section, you can find all the individual templates. So for example, if we were doing a single server Ubuntu, here's the template. You can see they're using the metadata section. If I scroll down slightly, we should get eventually to the resources, and there you can see the resource is a Tableau server, which is going to be an EC2 instance. So yeah, no need to reinvent the wheel here. This would be the starting point I would suggest if you are looking to start building your Tableau servers with infrastructure as code. But hopefully that has been useful and you found that an interesting insight into some of the different ways that you might want to deploy and manage your Tableau servers rather than just having to manually configure each time you want to do updates or create a new instance. So with that, I want to thank you all for joining us, and hopefully we'll see you in one of the other videos that are available on the channel.